Hello, my friends. A werewolf wants to kill me with an axe. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I was 10 years old when my mother took me to a Halloween store for the first time. She had finally given in to taking me there after I had spent weeks begging to get a costume that hadn't been made by my grandmother, even though buying one wasn't really in our family's budget. I promise I won't pick out something expensive, I said, ever the reasonable child. I just don't want to be a witch again. Oh Leah, what's wrong with being a witch again? You look adorable. She clearly did not understand. I'm not a baby anymore, Mom, I said. I don't want to be adorable, I want to be cool. Can't you just be a cool witch? Of course I could, I said, but I don't want to. Well, do you even know what kind of cool costume you want? I'll know it when I see it, I said. When she finally took my infant siblings and me to the costume store, I could hardly contain my excitement. The place was covered floor to ceiling in seasonal decorations, with bright orange gourds smiling up at us and purple bats glittering from above. I was in heaven. Look at these, I said, dashing to a pair of skeletons who were posed like ballroom dancers, the hand of one on the waist of the other. Isn't that romantic? My mother, for all of her infinite patience, could not pull her attention away from my baby brother and sister, who had begun to cry the moment we entered the store. That's great, Leah, she said, hoisting my sister over one shoulder as other customers shot her daggers over the sound of two infants screaming. I was too young to notice my mother struggling, so I simply ran ahead without a second thought, bolting down an aisle decorated like a haunted house. I was already picking up plastic spiders and snakes when I heard my mother yelling a warning behind me not to go too far. When I finally found the aisle of costumes, I was in awe. The walls were lined with colorful printouts of people dressed as vampires, witches, and Power Rangers. Having grown up with handmade reproductions of name-brand costumes, I was eager to wear everything I could get my hands on. Moving in between the other kids who were crowding around the posters which advertised the available outfits, I managed to grab a handful of costumes: a swamp monster, an alien, a scarecrow, a medieval queen, and a werewolf. I rushed toward the dressing rooms, where the teenage attendant leaned against the doorway and reading a comic book. He looked up at me as I approached, nodding in recognition at my polyester treasure and scooting aside to let me into the dressing rooms without a word. I could have spent the rest of the evening trying on costumes in front of that dressing room mirror. The thrill of becoming someone or something else with a simple outfit change felt so powerful to me, but when I finally stepped into the werewolf costume, I knew I had found the one. The paws, gloves, really, that came with it were a little large for me, but I didn't mind. I practiced growling into the mirror, feeling powerful and scary, but, most of all, cool. I knew I had to show my mother immediately. I realized then that she had probably been worried about me, considering how long I had been trying on my costumes. And I made my way out of the dressing room with my mask and paws still firmly in place. As soon as I stepped into the store, I knew something was wrong. It was dark, and there were no kids milling around near the costumes, no parents shuffling around and looking anxious. I moved to peek my head around the corner, seeing only a row of empty aisles. "Hello," I called, hoping the bored teenage attendant would at least still be around. Instead, there was nothing and no one. The store's fluorescence had faded, leaving only a dim orange glow from the pumpkin-shaped string lights hung across each aisle. Every shadow seemed to breathe and swell around me. "Mum, can you hear me?" I couldn't keep my voice from shaking. knowing instinctively that she wasn't here. I called out for her again and again. My palms started to sweat under the werewolf gloves, and I was on the verge of tears. A sound like toppling boxes caught my attention. I turned toward it, looking between the darkened aisles of decorations. "Is someone there?" I said, raising my voice. I could hear it echoing off of the linoleum. No response. Instead, the sound came again, louder. I did what any 10 years old would have done in that circumstance. I went to investigate. The string lights did nothing to help me navigate the store's aisles, which felt so much more narrow in the dark. I could smell the cheap plastic from the masks and the scent of temporary color hairspray all around me. As I moved, I kept one werewolf paw held out for navigation, hoping to prevent myself from falling into a display of fake mustaches or plastic vampire fangs. Every footstep I made rang out in perfect clarity, the tapping of my shoes clicking softly in the dark. I wished for a flashlight, anything to push the shadows away. It was then that I noticed a singular overhead light by the entrance, its low fluorescent glow a faint orange. The sound I came to investigate had since stopped, and I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat in my ears. So I made for the light. As the towering walls of the aisles peeled away from my vision, I saw it. The top of its head brushed the ceiling tiles, its neck bent crookedly to accommodate. The proportions looked wrong and, even as a child, I was aware of just how unnatural its existence seemed. This impossibly tall figure staring down at me, with its head cocked to the side. It could only glare down the length of its nose, with its large eyes swollen out of its almost human skull. The arms were long and withered like the rest of its emaciated, shaking frame. Each new angle of the creature presented a fresh terror, and I could feel myself breaking into a cold sweat. The worst part, however, was the smile. It had no teeth, none that I could see, at least, but that didn't stop it from grinning. There was a wet shine to its lips, which stretched the skin around them like the film that appears on boiled milk, and a thin line of drool began to fall from the edge of its mouth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn and run, to hide back in the dressing room until the morning and pretend this had never happened. My every nerve was on fire, and I could feel my palms tingling under the werewolf paws. Slowly, the figure revealed a hand so large, the act of moving it toppled a pile of cardboard boxes with a soft thud. The figure made no sign of acknowledging the sound, its unblinking eyes staring straight at me. It raised its hand, wide and spindly like a spoked wheel, and pressed one narrow finger against its lips. Silence. The sound was less like human speech and more like an animal imitating it. The creature grinned again, this time opening its mouth wider and, with a crack, unhinging its jaw to reveal a hidden row of teeth in the back of its throat, each of them thin and pointed like barbed quills. It was then that I was finally able to scream. I turned on my heels and booked it down the aisle, air catching in my throat, unable to breathe. I had never known panic like this, had never known so clearly that I was actually in danger. Behind me, I could hear the figure topple more boxes, but I didn't look back. I ran until my feet were burning, streaking into the changing room, the curtains of the dressing area flapping around me as I dove inside. A bench draped with a dark cloth sat in the corner. I hurriedly turned it and pushed it against the edge of the doorway. I moved further through the covered hallway, the mirrors lining each wall sending a chill up my spine whenever I caught my own reflection. Outside, I could hear the creature knocking displays to the floor. It was still searching for me. At the end of the hall, I ducked into a small room with the door, pulling it closed behind me as quietly as I could. I pressed my back against the wall, squatting down to catch my breath. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of the bench being shoved aside, the feet scraping against the linoleum behind the door. I could hear it smacking its lips, breath heavy and labored. I remember thinking that was something we had in common. The doorknob began to shake, and I pressed my back against the wood with all the strength I had. My legs shook from the force as I propped them against the nearby wall and used them to push myself into the door. Outside, the creature began to giggle, breathy bursts of laughter that sounded like dry kindling being rubbed together. I braced for the door to shatter, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real. This isn't happening," I whispered. Each groan of pressure on the door felt more urgent than the one before it. "Stop it," I said, and then, screaming, "Stop." The door gave way. The tall teenager who was stationed at the changing rooms burst into the room behind me and I fell against the opposite wall with a groan. "Are you okay?" he asked. "What the hell is all the screaming about?" I was in a daze, looking back down the hallway behind him to see if the creature was still there in the shadows. Instead, I saw people milling about and carrying clear plastic bags of costumes in their arms. "Kid?" the attendant asked. "Hello. Sorry," I said, getting to my feet. "I'm fine, I promise." "What about all the yelling?" "You freaked some toddlers out." "I thought I saw something," I said, unsure of how to articulate what I just experienced. "Oh, I understand," he said, nodding. "You do? Don't worry," the teenager said. "I'll go get the bug spray." As he turned to leave, I could see my mother waiting impatiently at the counter, bouncing my sister on her hip while pushing my brother in the stroller. I quickly shoved the werewolf costume back into the bag and ran towards her, waving my free arm over my head. "There you are, Leah," she said. "Did you find something cool?" I pushed the costume forward and she smiled. "Very cool, indeed. Ready to go?" "Please," I said, nodding emphatically. I couldn't help wondering if any of the night had been real. My mind was reeling, playing back every moment with sharp clarity, but the evening had felt so surreal that I didn't know if I could trust my own senses. As we made our way to the checkout, I instinctively looked back over my shoulder once more, peering down the dark hallway of the changing rooms. There, in a sliver of shadow, was the creature, bent at the waist and leering. It raised a single finger to its mouth once again, eyes wild, and mimed a final silence.